All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today, including participants and panelists. Welcome to today's CNCF webinar, Best Practices for Monitoring Application Health on Kubernetes, a conversation with real platform owners. My name is Michelle Piot. I'm the Senior Product Manager at DigitalOcean, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. We have a full panel of speakers joining us, and in a minute, I will have them each introduce themselves. Few housekeeping rules. During the webinar, we have, you won't be able to talk as an attendee, but we have a Q&A box at the bottom. So if you have any questions, please enter them there and we'll go through as many as we can at the end. The session is being recorded and the link will be sent out after the presentation. So before we get started, I wanted to cover the agenda for the webinar. So first we have intros. Then William will be going through how Linkerd is used for application health. We'll have real life best practices roundtable with our panelists, and then we'll have audience Q&A. Okay, so now it's time to meet everyone. I've already introduced myself, so I'd like to ask William Morgan, the CEO of Buoyant and Linkerd maintainer, to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm William Morgan, like Michelle said, Linkerd maintainer. Also the CEO of Buoyant, which is a primary sponsor of Linkerd, and I am happy to be here.
Great, so let's move on to our panelists, John, Cole, and Zach, who will give a short intro.
Yeah, hey, I'm John Richards. I'm a software engineer at Nordstrom. I work on the traffic mesh team, which is responsible for API management and service-to-service communication.
I'm Cole Callistra. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Kairos. We are a startup in the facial recognition space based out of Miami.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm one of the back-end engineers on the platform team at Attest. We're a startup in the market research space, and my team's responsible for everything server-side.
Great, so I'll turn the presentation over to William for a quick presentation.
Thanks, thank you, Michelle. So I have about 5 minutes to just give a very brief overview of Linkerd. What I'm hoping we can do in this in the webinar is I want to talk a tiny bit about Linkerd, but I want to paint the whole picture of application health. So Linkerd is just one part of that picture. So hopefully we get to see the whole story. So what is Linkerd? It's a CNCF project. Of course, it's open source service mesh. It's been around for a couple of years. We've been in production at companies around the world for about 2 years, and have a very healthy and thriving Slack community. Lots of GitHub stars, of course, very, very important. Lots of Docker Hub pulls, lots of contributors, and we're used at all sorts of fancy companies around the world. And you know, why, when you are thinking about Linkerd, you know, typically we break the kind of value propositions down into 3 categories. The first is around visibility, and that's primarily what we're going to be talking about in the webinar today. This is things like, okay, can we give you telemetry on the golden metrics for service? Can we give you insight into what's actually happening in your applications? Because Linkerd is able to monitor and view the traffic as it flows through the different services. There's also a value proposition around reliability. So Linkerd can do retries and timeouts and circuit breaking, and basically allow you to handle different types of partial failures, whether it's from software or hardware. And there's a third value prop around security. Linkerd can initiate and terminate TLS. It can kind of provide mechanisms for doing service identity and policy on top of that. But in all 3 cases, it's not a complete answer. It's not the complete answer to observability or to reliability or to security. It's part of the picture, and the part that that Linkerd is very good at, especially, is providing those values at the platform layer. And for folks who are on the SRE side of the house or the platform owner side of the house, that kind of flexibility and that kind of power at the platform layer can often be very, very convenient. So let's dive a little bit into application health. And to make everyone feel comfortable, I put some surgical instruments from ancient Rome in here, critical to maintaining your own health. So like I said, Linkerd is just one part of the picture. We can provide golden metrics. So typically with golden metrics, we refer to we mean things like success rates and request volumes and latency distributions, right? And Linkerd can describe those metrics to you, and those are kind of top line metrics when you're thinking about the health of an individual service or application. But we can't look inside the box, right? All we can do is observe the traffic coming into the service and out of the service. So if you put this in the bigger context, well, if we're talking about application health in Kubernetes, you're also thinking about, okay, well, what's the health of the underlying cluster? Presumably, there are machines somewhere under there, virtual or physical, that have to be up and running. You're looking at the application health with inside the box, so what the application knows itself about what's happening. You're looking at logs and distributed tracing and other kinds of output from the services. And then there's a whole set of organizational concerns, which is, okay, when something starts going wrong, who's responsible? And how do you alert? And how do you know? And what's the chain of kind of notification that happens so that the issue gets addressed as rapidly as possible? Those are all part of the broader story of application health. And so, the big question for me that I'm hoping we can kind of get at in this webinar is, okay, we've got four, I guess, excellent technology organizations here that are doing very interesting things with Kubernetes. How do those organizations actually accomplish this sort of thing in practice? And with that, I will turn it over to Michelle.
Great, thanks so much, William, for the overview. As a reminder, if people have questions, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the window. So let's go ahead and get started with our panel discussion. Okay. Let's start with Zach. Can you tell us a bit about your infrastructure at your company? Like, for example, the number of services, number of clusters, how that's organizationally handled?
Yep, so starting from the organizational side, we have about 3 cross-functional squads. The platform team, the part that I'm in, is sort of responsible for all of the infrastructure side. And we actually have an interesting case where we recently moved from ECS, which is the Amazon homegrown Elastic Container Service, over to EKS, the hosted Kubernetes version. We have 2 kind of sides to our platform. One is our respondent side, so we're in the market research space. One is the respondent side where respondents can answer questions, and one is the kind of brand facing side where people can create pieces of research, and they have really different characteristics. So on one side we see infrequent but very spiky load. On the other side we see the same but kind of it presents in different ways. And then we have around 15 to 20 services that sit in the middle that make up the various components.
Great, thanks. How about your company, John?
Yeah, so we have about 350 services running in Kubernetes, comprised of over 7,000 pods. We have multiple clusters in multiple different cloud providers and regions. Our largest cluster has over 40 different or 40 nodes in the cluster, so quite a big scale that we have to work with. And there's over 50 development teams that kind of touch, have their applications deployed across those clusters.
Thanks. And Cole?
Sure. So we have our infrastructure is primarily hosted at AWS. It's a COPS-based deployment, COPS and Terraform. We are in the process of migrating to Google Cloud and are running on GKE. Right now we have everything in kind of just a prod and a non-prod environment. We're at about 50 nodes or so. We run a mix of different instance types. GPU is kind of our primary concern. We have around 10 or so services deployed currently as part of our facial recognition offering, SaaS offering. And we also offer our product in an on-premises setup. So we also use Linkerd to kind of give that visibility and stuff like that for our customers that are hosting our software themselves, so on Kubernetes.
Great, thanks. So now back to John. Which teams own the application health in your company?
So really, it's kind of a multi-layered model. Primarily the development teams own application health, but they're definitely not alone. We have an SRE team that's heavily integrated and supporting with all of our production applications, and then a platform team that also provides additional support. So we kind of have several different layers there, all tackling application health across. But it's primarily the development team's responsibility for that.
Thanks. Cole, how about at your org?
Sure. So we're a lot smaller. We have about 10 to 15 engineers spread throughout the world. We have our main office in the U.S. We have some folks in Brazil as well as Singapore. So primarily, it's my team, what we call our technology team, that's responsible for both development and operations. And we also have kind of our research team in Singapore that focuses mainly on research and development and the machine learning side of the house. But it's primarily our one team that's pretty much US centric that's responsible for application health.
Thanks. Zach?
Hi, yeah, so our kind of organizational structure loosely follows the Spotify squads model. So we have cross-functional squads. So in terms of ownership of the kind of application health, as much as possible, we want to push that down, give that ownership back to the teams that created each of the applications. So we do have a platform team that kind of operates as infra and a bit of SRE and a couple of other things, but like ultimately we're also a feature team like lots of the other ones. So for us, Linkerd provides a bunch of like really interesting cases, like lots of freebies that the kind of infra teams can kind of give to all of the other squads that they can get started with before they start, looking more deeply into what they would need to see contextually about each of the services that they're deploying.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's go back to Cole. What's the strategy for understanding the health of your applications, including when things go wrong?
Right now, it's pretty basic. We haven't kind of elevated into the more advanced type of monitoring, but we primarily use external, like our service is an API that provided to developers. So we use external monitoring to kind of continually ping the health of our application, generate metrics, alert us when it's down. But then inside, we use kind of out of the box Kubernetes tools like Prometheus and Grafana to generate some alerts and some custom. We also have some custom metrics that we track, such as like the duty cycle of the GPUs that we're using, so that we can make sure we're kind of optimizing the efficiency of those, which are quite expensive to run on in cloud providers. Our goal is in the near future to get more into kind of application centric and business centric monitoring to kind of to get our metrics down to things that are more impactful to our end users than just simple kind of health of the CPU, memory, disk, and that kind of thing, network. So.
Thanks. How about your company, Zach?
Yeah, so as part of the move that I mentioned from ECS to Kubernetes, we brought up lots of the kind of standard Kubernetes monitoring tools, again, like Prometheus, like Alert Manager. So for understanding the kind of the health of the application, those are there, and they are much more valuable than some of the monitoring tools we had previously, which were just kind of built-in CloudWatch stuff that comes with AWS. Our traffic is kind of spiky, and depending on which side of the platform you're on, we're either CPU bound or memory bound. So on the CPU bound side, the respondent side, the kind of the metrics that come out of Linkerd are a really good early warning system for us for things that aren't going so well. Just the kind of basic stuff where you'd start requests, errors, duration of requests, those sorts of things, give really good signals at the beginning that something might be going untoward and someone might need to look at something.
Okay, thank you. John.
Yeah, so our strategy is, to try to be proactive around, monitoring. We're very data-driven, very big on observability, being able to understand and see what is happening with our systems. We do things like load testing and production to be able to catch potential issues, and we really focus around spike events. That tends to be, correlate very closely to where we see, potential issues coming. When things do go wrong, it's kind of a very wide-reaching response. We huddle members across very different teams and disciplines, and everyone kind of comes to the table and sees if they have a way that they can help, and then kind of selects themselves out if they see that there's not something that they can contribute. But it's kind of get everyone together and see how we can tackle a given problem, understand what's going on, and then come up with a response.
Thanks.
Actually, I have a question for John, since he's in I think the biggest org here. Given that you have all these different teams, there's the developer teams, there's the Kubernetes team, there's just a mesh team, there's a something else team. How do you partition the responsibilities across those? Is there like a rubric that you use where developers are responsible for X and Kubernetes team is responsible for Y, and this is how we split it out?
Yeah, the lines can sometimes get kind of blurry, right? And I think that's something that just comes with first of all, we don't really have a concept of like territorial ownership and closed off. Everybody's very collaborative, so it's a matter of just coming together. I attend stand-ups of different teams to understand like what's going on with them. We have common Slack channels where we communicate so that we can collaborate on common issues that where those lines kind of get blurry between, for instance, running a service mesh on top of Kubernetes. Is that a Kubernetes team responsibility? Is it a service mesh team responsibility? Where does that kind of end? So I think it's just more about being collaborative, understanding that we're all trying to solve the larger same problem together, and just kind of seeing how we can each help each other out.
What about for like the on-call structure and like who gets called first? Because that's where decisions sometimes have to be made.
Yeah, I think that it really kind of depends on whose alert would go off for a given monitoring situation that we have. But there's definitely an escalation path and an ability to bring in people, page someone from a different dependent team if necessary. So in an example, like if a monitor for Linkerd went off and someone on my team got paged and thought that there was an underlying Kubernetes issue that was needed, they have a very clear way to get a hold of someone on that team to bring them in, and kind of everybody keep looking until we identified what the issue actually was and get a resolution.
Okay, staying on John, actually. And I know Zach and Cole answered this to some extent already. How does your company use Linkerd as part of your monitoring strategy?
Yeah, so we're still very early in our journey with Linkerd, but what really drew us to it was several things. One, the enhanced observability that we get, and just kind of a standardized view that we can offer to our customers within the cluster to see like what is going on within their applications at a detail that wasn't always easy to achieve uniformly across all the different services and development teams that we had. And then also the MTLS secure communications between the cluster. So we're still kind of early in that journey, but the observability that we've seen out of it seems to be one of the more compelling things that teams are really drawn to. And I think that that's where we're going to see the biggest value as we start, bringing more and more teams into the Linkerd mesh.
Thanks. Zach, do you want to add anything about your strategy, or maybe talk about Linkerd history at your company?
Yeah, definitely. So we actually started on Linkerd 1, and we had that. We had some kind of distributed tracing outside Linkerd, I think with Zipkin, and that had some uses, but I think we were trying to use it for things it didn't really solve. So we kept running into that age-old thing where If you trace every request, you end up with too much data. If you trace a percentage of the requests, you start to miss things that would show you what was going wrong. And distributed tracing has its place, and it is part of a great way of managing the kind of health of everything. But we started to find that an aggregated view of the applications and their interactions was a lot more useful for the cases that we were trying to solve. So Linkerd 2 kind of does that for free, with kind of backed by Prometheus. So that kind of is the basis of the strategy for monitoring, and it's been working quite well.
Great. And Cole, do you have anything to add about your Linkerd strategy?
Sure. So we started down the road last summer. We had kind of moved our application over to use gRPC from being completely, REST-based HTTP in between the services. So once we started with gRPC, we kind of learned that traditional load balancing, layer 4 load balancing, like we were doing with Kubernetes services, don't tend to work so well with gRPC, since the connections stay persistent and get reused. So we started looking for solutions. We tried client-side load balancing, which worked up to an extent when we had kind of one client to many servers, but we're in a many-to-many situation where we had many pod clients talking to many servers. The load balancing wasn't very efficient, and we're having lots of issues. So we started looking into service mesh to rectify that. We spent some time with Istio, and after a few months, we had built out tons of YAML, but we were nowhere near getting ready to go to production with it. We just had too many issues. And we decided to, I forget who it was myself or somebody on my team, made the suggestion to look at Linkerd. And this was back in November or so, and we installed it in about 5 minutes from the website, and had it up and running, and it just kind of worked out of the box. Everything worked. All the metrics lit up, the dashboard, Grafana, everything just worked. And we had zero configuration that we had to do. And we're kind of shocked, really, how easy it was to use. And from a load balancing standpoint, that just worked. And when we had questions, we're kind of able to reach out to the Linkerd team on the Slack channel, and they've been amazing with any help and answering our stupid questions, and almost instantaneously. And it's really worked out well for us. Having that ability to see our request flow and just the Linkerd dashboard itself has been just unbelievable for us in terms of finding things wrong, in terms of understanding which of our services, especially on the machine learning side, because we're running TensorFlow serving, and we have many machine learning models that are all being served out of the same set of containers. So knowing which model is getting hit the most, which is taking the longest time, where the success rates are, all that stuff has just been amazing. And each new release that comes out is kind of expanding just that out-of-the-box experience more and more. So it's been unbelievably helpful for us. We were kind of in the dark before we had Linkerd. Now we seen the light, so to speak.
I think that's super in line actually with our experience. The startup, it is just amazingly easy to get started with it, and it sort of does all of the things you expect it to do, but straight away. So yeah, just echoing what you said, Cole.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things we've found is that, like, to us, it kind of felt more like the difference between iPhone and Android, whereas, Android, you can do anything in the world with it, any kind of settings, you can change everything. And iPhone, you kind of tend to be limited, and they kind of picked whatever options that Apple thought were the best options, and that's kind of set in stone. Linkerd kind of feels more like that, where it kind of seems like the out-of-the-box experience is really there, and like you don't really have, there's not that much that you have to worry about, did we tweak all these right settings? Is it tuned correctly? It just kind of works. Even like if you look at some external providers for monitoring and metrics and things like that, you kind of can get overwhelmed initially when you start to spin it up, because you just are presented with a blank canvas and you have to kind of figure out, if you move to like a service like Datadog or something like that, or CloudWatch, you have to figure out kind of what it is that we should really be monitoring. And this kind of takes that challenge away from you, because it's out of the box. You kind of get this set of metrics and visibility that you really don't have to configure or spend time on, and it's just useful stuff straight away.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've not touched on the kind of the service profile side of Linkerd yet, but the config that you can or that you would want to give, we found has sort of been informed by the tool itself. So it's this like weird circular thing where you can learn about your application, which informs your decisions for making them about the application. It's like odd and kind of recursive.
This is really, really great to hear. Zach, especially since you've seen Linkerd 1.x, and have moved at least partially to 2, a lot of what we tried to do with 2.0 is make it zero config, or as minimal config as possible, and as rapid to get started. And that was all based on kind of what we saw, the struggles that people were having with the 1.0 branch, where they would get a lot of value out of it. Speaking from like the Linkerd maintainer side, they would get tremendous value out of it, but it took a long time to get to that point. You do a lot of configuration, you have to like set things up, you have to change things in your app. So with 2.0, we really focused on trying to make it so that you can go from 0 to like full observability in 60 seconds or less. I don't know what the right tagline is, but it's really good to hear that that's been your experience.
Definitely. With Linkerd 1, there is more config, there's more to write, and sometimes like we found we were getting a huge amount of value, but the value we were getting was kind of one size fits none. Like you end up in this situation where because it is kind of out of service and like, or maybe out of pod would be a better way of putting it. You don't really know who the consumers are at each point, so you kind of set up the config for lots of the worst cases, but the worst cases for who is really hard to decide.
Yeah, and then to Cole's point around gRPC load balancing, like this is one of the things we never expected to be like the attractive feature of Linkerd. We just kind of did it because we're like, okay, well, we've got to support gRPC, and okay, well, you should have load balancing in there. And then it turns out that it was a big use case for a ton of people as they moved into Kubernetes, and it was such a problem that I ended up writing this blog post, which you can find on the Kubernetes blog, about why it is, everything works until you drop into Kubernetes, and then all of a sudden, like nothing works, and you can either fix a bunch of code or you can install Linkerd. And so we've actually had a whole bunch of Linkerd adoption purely from, at least that was like the thing that drew them in. And then once they were there, they were like, oh, this other stuff is nice too. So it was pretty fun.
I know I'm moderating, but I will add that I'm a total Kubernetes noob and got Linkerd up and running in a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll definitely echo what Zach and Cole had to say in regards to the ease of use with Linkerd too. It's just, very simple to get going and just start seeing and playing with yourself. And I'll also add that when you do have questions, when you do need, something beyond, the Linkerd support, in the Slack channel, and engaging with them has just been extremely easy and very collaborative, and very, I just really enjoy it. The user experience goes beyond just the application for me.
That's really great to hear.
Great, let's move on to our next question. John, what do you think are the most challenging aspects of managing application health?
Yeah, I think detecting an issue early, I think is universally a challenge. And then once you've detected an issue, getting the information that you need to know how you can quickly resolve that without all of the noise. And particularly when you have so many different applications and services interconnected, how you can uniformly have that kind of information. If everyone's kind of doing their own thing, you might have varying levels of insight into what's happening as you try to trace a problem. So I think having a standard in a way that you can very easily detect and then start the resolution of a problem, I think is one of the more challenging aspects as your scale grows.
Thanks. How about you, Cole?
For us, the most challenging portion, I mean, I guess it's very similar, is, you know, getting to that root cause. You know, it's those kind of unknowns that tend to bite us, right? Things that we weren't monitoring in the past that maybe we should have been, or just we had no idea that they were even a thing. So, you know, it's kind of been, especially as you add complexity into your environment, you know, with Kubernetes, with Linkerd, with, you know, all the container networking, all the different components that we're adding into our platforms these days, you know, it just kind of increases the amount of points of things that could go wrong. So it's just kind of, for us, the challenge has been kind of getting a handle on all the different bits of complexity that we've added, you know, throughout the months and years and so forth.
Thanks. Zach?
Yeah, I think similar themes, I guess. Sort of knowing, one thing that I found is that lots of the tools you can plug in and lots of the setup you can do and lots of for all sorts, for Prometheus, for whatever, is kind of about the raw information, but like so you get an alert that says like something's broken or whatever it says, maybe hopefully something more useful than that. But kind of like what you do about it, like if it's not telling you exactly what is wrong, it's telling you that it's kind of like the early warning indicator. It's sometimes hard to track down where the problem is and what the thing is. That's been challenging, and I think the dashboard that comes with Linkerd has been really, really strong for that. It kind of gives you an out of the box. There's a really good blog post actually. I think it uses emojis and creates some fake example where one of the services is failing some percentage of the time, and it's a good way of showing you how easy it is to see in your kind of direct tree of services what things are breaking. And as far as like tutorials or intros go, it's super transferable into the real world, which is nice. So just kind of running the dashboard and immediately being able to see the kind of the interactions between stuff and how they have an impact on one another alleviates lots of the kind of most challenging aspects that we see.
Great. Cole, can you speak a bit to how monitoring application health has evolved over time at your organization?
Sure. So I saw a tweet, I forget the author, so I don't want to credit the wrong person, but recently, or a while back, saying that, you know, since the introduction of microservices, you know, every production outage becomes a murder mystery. You know, and this has really been true for us, right? We were originally, you know, we had started with a big monolith application and, you know, slowly migrated to microservices. And, you know, now it's kind of, you know, when something goes wrong, it's not always clear who the bad actor in the environment is, you know, it could be an error that comes up in one service could have actually had its origins somewhere way down the request path. You know, so to Zach's point, like we kind of have been able to leverage that Linkerd dashboard to see the request path and see, you know, if a particular service somewhere in the request chain is acting up, you know, either throwing errors or just even worse than errors is really kind of running slowly, or, you know, or still alive, but just you know, delaying their, you know, say timing out or just taking a long time to serve back a request. You know, we're able to kind of see that. You know, in the past, we've just been kind of running blind and, you know, relying on logs, or worse, trying to look at timestamps from different logs from different containers to try and match them up to see, you know, okay, we think that this request, or trying to kind of basically do distributed tracing by looking at logs. It's not ideal, but now we kind of are able to kind of move to a more automated scenario, you know, using the dashboard and so forth.
Thanks. And Zach, how about you?
Yeah, so I touched on it super briefly earlier, but like back in the origins of very small startup world, application health was kind of like, is it running? And then like, do health checks pass? And then after that is like, is the load balancer responding in a reasonable amount of time? Which is just nowhere near what is useful when stuff starts going wrong. So we tried to make Zipkin work for cases that it wasn't really designed for. That caused its whole own sort of suite of problems. It was producing just an enormous amount of data, so much that you can't really dig through and work out what's useful, what's wrong, what's helpful. Then we did Linkerd 1, and then after that Linkerd 2, and we've not had to worry about as much of the out of the box app health stuff, and concentrated more of our time and more of our engineering capacity on the stuff that's really different about our apps or our business or whatever, because the requests, the error rates, the durations, those are kind of handled and done for us for free. So yeah, now we're focusing much more on stuff that's specific to us. How can we surface that information in a useful way?
Thanks. John, can you speak a bit about the evolution of monitoring your company?
Yeah, I mean, I think, maybe not even just necessarily just for Nordstrom, but I think just across the industry, as we've seen, the evolution from, as Cole was saying, from more monolithic type applications and scheduled, deployment windows to microservices and short-lived, computing jobs and continuous deployments. The surface area kind of has increased of what you're keeping an eye on, as well as the amount of change happening in a given, day. So I think that has just, with that kind of evolution of how we are doing software delivery, it's definitely kind of spread out what you need to keep an eye on, and the amount of information coming that you need to be able to sift through to get the valuable stuff that, to detect when there is an issue, or, how do you tell if all these components are all working correctly? So I think it just really increases surface area.
Thanks. Okay, Cole, could you share a war story with us and talk about some of the lessons that were learned from that?
The worst thing that's happened.
Sure. I mean, our biggest war story was that, we spent quite a bit of time, I kind of hinted at this at the beginning, using Istio to try and do the load balancing for our gRPC requests. It was, I'm not sure what the status is of that project and so forth. It seems to have a lot of momentum behind it and a lot of big players in the industry. But for us, it really was overkill, and we could just never really get it to work beyond the examples. And there really wasn't much information on kind of running it in a production environment, even though it seemed to need a lot of tweaking to run in production. In hindsight, I wish we had just kind of started with Linkerd and not wasted a few months, messing with YAML configurations and running countless load tests. That's kind of our biggest thing, and I think the other piece is, wishing that we had kind of started with managed Kubernetes service like an AKS or a GKE or something like that, rather than trying to roll our own with kops and Terraform and so forth. Even with kops, while it is kind of somewhat managed, it does tend to lag behind, and with whatever current version of Kubernetes that it's supporting. So when there's been security issues and things like that, we've had kind of issues staying up to date on the Kubernetes front.
Thanks. Zach, do you have a story for us?
Sure. I touched briefly on our experiences with Zipkin and trying to use it for the wrong things, but so that's kind of one thing. The other one was a sort of, it was kind of just a problem that stemmed from, so we have a bunch of gRPC services that they have a bunch of protobuf definitions. For a while, those protobufs were installed in a submodule that crossed two repos, and because of the way that that was configured with our build pipeline, we ended up deploying a thing where an endpoint wasn't there when it should have been, or something like that. And the observability and the metrics that come out of Linkerd can tell you, like, per HTTP route or per RPC call, what the kind of the path is, or what the method that's being called is. So it's like immediately obvious about what was broken and why it was broken. And that's something that maybe an assumption we wouldn't have questioned immediately without the right information at the right point in the right way.
Great. Okay. Staying on you, Zach. What Kubernetes best monitoring practices, tips, and techniques can you share with us?
Big question. I think two things. I think one is monitoring something is better than monitoring nothing, kind of a given. Having some information and presenting it in a way that is going to be useful to you is good. I also think that there are a bunch of methods for identifying the information that you use. The use method, the read method, that kind of operate around like which bits of information you should record. And actually, the tooling can sort of do that for you. So we've spent zero amount of effort on that, just use Linkerd, and can now instead focus on the things that are relevant to us and monitoring those. So we don't have to worry about out of the box stuff for our apps and not waste time on that when we could do something better.
Great. Can you just speak a bit to the use and read method for those that aren't familiar with it? Methods.
Oh yeah, definitely. The use method, I can't remember any of the words in the acronym. The read method is requests, errors, and duration of requests. And the idea behind it is that with those three kind of key pieces of information, you can, if you record those, you can piece together what is breaking and what is healthy and what is not. So instead of having to worry about how do I monitor, you target those three pieces of information, and then you can kind of build the picture around them.
Thanks. Okay. Well, thank you very much, panelists.
Michelle, can I actually flip this around, since I know you do a whole lot of this at DigitalOcean? Can I ask you the same question? Do you have a Kubernetes monitoring best practice or tip or technique to share with us?
Let's see.
Am I putting you on the spot?
You can use a Linkerd. I can give you a monitoring best practices, which is something that Cole spoke to earlier, which I think is really important, and that's understanding what your customers are seeing, what the impact is on them, not just what's happening at the infrastructure or app level. So, are they seeing like timeouts or slow requests, that sort of thing, I think is really important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, any other questions for the panelists, William?
Well, actually, yes. Thanks for asking. I think both Cole and Zach mentioned spiky traffic as one of the things that they had to think about. I was wondering whether either of you were considering doing anything around auto-scaling, and whether that was a viable solution for handling spiky traffic.
We do use, so we heavily leverage auto-scaling. Right now, we kind of have a mixture of, we're using both the Kubernetes horizontal pod autoscaler for our containers, as well as the cluster autoscaler to scale up the cluster itself. We also, because we're running GPUs and they're really expensive, we run the auto spotting application, which replaces on-demand nodes with spot instances in our autoscaling groups. So the one piece we would love to be able to get to, right now we're doing just auto-scaling based on kind of CPU utilization and kind of some GPU utilization auto-scaling, but we'd like to get to more of auto-scaling based on request volume, request duration, and things like that, to kind of what Zach was talking about. We'd love to be able to somehow leverage kind of the metrics that we're getting from Linkerd and kind of push that back into the horizontal pod autoscaler.
We do similar things. I mentioned that our platform is two-sided. One of the sides that's kind of CPU bound, very easy to plug into the horizontal pod autoscaler, scale based on CPU. The other side is slightly harder to do that. We do have some autoscaling based on those sorts of things. But for us, I feel like sometimes you can scale sideways as much as you want, but sometimes you could just like tweak the architecture a little bit and kind of remove a whole class of problems that it becomes hard to solve only using autoscaling.
Yeah, and I can say, we have a lot of spike patterns that we pay attention to, whether there's a special sale that is going to get broadcast, and we know that that's going to come with a surge of traffic when that announcement goes out, or certain times of years that we have different events. So we try to also pre-scale when we know that there are these waves that are going to come. Sometimes autoscaling is great, but sometimes, being reactionary, you still, are trying to catch up. But then aside from that, load autoscaling groups and horizontal pod autoscaling are definitely in high use here.
Very cool.
All right. Well, thank you very much, panelists. Let's move on to the audience questions. Okay. So Zach, we have a question from Navneet. We are using AWS EKS. We have a scenario where our nodes are going down without any alarms. It's not very frequent, but it happens when we ask for more resources. So all the pods are running to the node, to that node is going to other nodes, but due to this, we are facing a small downtime. Have you faced such issues? And if yes, can you please talk about the solution?
Yes, sort of. If I understand the question correctly, we've seen a scenario which we're still looking into a little bit, where depending on the usage of some of the pods on some of the nodes, high usage can result in Kubernetes registering the node as node lost, which takes a little bit of time for it to like move everything and bring the state of your application back to where it should be. The things that we found useful here are the pods that you can run. There's a bunch of Kubernetes node exporter pods which give you node level metrics into your kind of alerting pipelines, as well as the cAdvisor pods which give you container level metrics. And between those two, we can see lots of stuff that like all the way down to like how many file descriptors a certain thing is using, that gives you a much clearer view of what sort of things might be causing that.
Okay, William, a question from Steve. Often when apps are experiencing issues, we restart containers. Is there an easy way to determine if this is an app or infra issue? And can Linkerd assist here?
Well, I mean, it sounds like you can just restart it and everything works again. So just keep rebooting. Is there an easy way to determine if it's an app or infra issue? I don't know if there's a general easy answer. I guess, there's things you could look at where, if you do a deploy and then suddenly every single pod is failing, okay, well, it's probably an app issue and not an infra issue. If everything's working fine except for this one pod over here, then like maybe it's an infra issue. I think what Linkerd will be useful for there is it will give you app level error metrics. So it'll give you things like, okay, well, what's my 5xx count, assuming it's HTTP traffic or something like that. And that'll give you at least a mechanism for saying, for identifying some class of app only issues. Or it'll say, okay, latency, has spiked from 30 milliseconds to 3000 milliseconds. Okay, that's probably an app issue. Not definitely. So I guess I'd say Linkerd can give you some good clues, but there's, I don't know if there's a easy answer to that without kind of understanding what your application is actually doing. And feel free to chime in if you think I've, for people who do this for their day jobs, if you think I've missed something in that answer.
All right, William again. Question from Todd. Easy to install and ease of use both sound great. What about installing on a COPS created kube stack that has a combination of ELBs and Nginx ingress services? Is there any disruption when installing, or should it be installed on a new kube cluster, deploy apps, and then migrate traffic to that new cluster?
Yeah, so that's a good question. One of the things we've tried very hard to do with Linkerd 2.0 is to make it an incremental thing. So you can install the control plane, you know, in a prod cluster, even if you wanted to be very daring, install the control plane, just runs off in a little namespace here. And then you can add you can roll one service at a time, or even one pod from one service, insert the sidecar proxies and see what happens. So, you know, I would not say step one is, okay, deploy this thing to production, like, let's see what happens. But it should be the case that, you know, with certain minor exceptions, if you have a functioning Kubernetes application and you install Linkerd, everything should continue working. And the exceptions that I can think of off the top of my head are if you have a protocol like SMTP, like a mail server, which is a server speaks first protocol, then because of the way that Linkerd does protocol detection, you have to do a little special magic to make that work. But unless you are doing like unencrypted SMTP or other weird things like that, generally everything should just work. But please don't try it in production. Try it in staging first.
Yeah, and that's kind of been my experience with testing. You know, we've been bringing things into the mesh and then taking it out, running different load test scenarios, and, you know, capturing traffic and stuff. So I'll say that my experience has been that you can do that without any real disruption.
Yeah, and that actually describes our stack pretty much. We have COPS with Nginx ingress and ELBs and so forth. You know, and we were able to inject, you know, install Linkerd and then start injecting the Linkerd proxy into different deployments that we're running, you know, without disruption. I mean, other than it, you know, it does force a restart of those pods, you know, so it will redeploy when you apply or inject the Linkerd proxy in, it's going to restart the pod. So as long as you can handle that, then it should be okay. But like William said, you know, obviously test and not in pro.
I think that's it for audience questions. Do you have a question, William? Or I have a question. It's up to you.
No, you do it.
Okay. What's your biggest wish list observability feature for Kubernetes?
Yes, I'm happy to go first. I think we deployed, we started in 2.something of Linkerd, and our like biggest wish list, this is going to be a cheat answer because we've already got it. Our biggest wish list was retries and timeouts on service profiles. We didn't touch on that much, but it's essentially the way that you kind of can configure per endpoint retries and timeout config for Linkerd to implement for you kind of for free. Something we really missed in Linkerd 1 is got it in Linkerd 2. And the way that you configure it allows you to put that config in the repos with your services rather than in the repos with your infrastructure, which is like really, really good when you're trying to give the ownership back to the teams that write the apps. Is sort of life-changing, according to the tweet that I made a while ago.
That's really good to hear, because one of the things we struggled with, since you're familiar with Linkerd 1.x, one of the things we really struggled with was dtabs for a variety of reasons, which is like this complex language that we use for routing. And one of the reasons, or one of the difficult things, was it was very hard to make them compose, right? And so you wanted to have one team that owned a service and control the routing logic for that service, and another team owned the routing logic for that service. And there was no good way of doing that other than kind of everyone just merge this thing together and let's hope it works. So yeah, a lot of the way we did service profiles was really focused on allowing per team configuration. So I'm glad that's working for you.
Cole, do you have a wish list feature?
Well, my wish list is just for more time, because service profiles is something that's next up on our Jira tasks. So we need to kind of get to that to implement the retries and stuff like that. But I do wish that for Kubernetes in general, that there was a better kind of out-of-the-box monitoring and alerting story, kind of similar to what you get from Linkerd. It would be nice if out of the box that there was kind of a set of standard metrics, standard alerts, and so forth that get you a baseline setup so that kind of everybody that's deploying Kubernetes is starting from the same place, and then you can expand from there.
Yeah, and I'll just say, for us, I think one of the biggest things was understanding our latency story. And that was definitely what kind of drew us to start looking at different service mesh offerings. And with Linkerd, we definitely get that.
William, are you going to say something?
No, I'm just sitting here happy.
All right.
Basking in the kind words.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, our panel and audience members alike. There'll be a webinar recording and slides available online later today, and we're looking forward to seeing you all at a future CNCF webinar. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.